This is the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast from Advanta IRA, where we show you how to explore investments beyond Wall Street and open your eyes to new options for your portfolio. It's time to take control and give yourself the freedom to choose where you invest your money.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. My name is Alex Perny, and today we are very pleased to welcome on investor Sara Jung. This is going to be a little bit of an interesting podcast from the perspective of, us having a lot of people that are, kind of with different entities and organizations talking about different investment structures and things like that. And not to downplay the awesome content we're going to get today, but it's going to be definitely a little bit more of a, use case scenario examination that we're going to go through with Sara's investing on kind of a how, what, and why, and how she has identified value in a very interesting way that's really kind of outside the borders of the United States that is still very accessible to investors in the U.S. One of the biggest problems plaguing any investor is finding value. It's kind of hard to find places that can give you appreciable appreciation in any real meaningful degree, whether you're looking at stocks, bonds, mutual funds, but especially in the flavor of what we do here on this podcast and what we do on a broader sense at Advanta IRA is people trying to find value in the real estate market. Throughout the past 5 years, and at least my career, the past 13 years, being very heavily involved in real estate investing, I've gotten to see a lot of things happen, and one thing is just the incredible narrowing of the value proposition in the single family space, and especially the commercial family space as well, to the point where, the median home price in the United States is $450,000. When you're talking about trying to make a value proposition in the rental space, it's kind of hard, especially if you're trying to do fix and flips. Again, the margins for being able to do stuff like that effectively and profitably are much harder to find. So and before we get to Sara, one of the cooler things that I got to experience earlier on in my career, maybe 2013 or 2014, was investing in Central and South America, whether that was Belize, Nicaragua. Got into some investing in Panama and also into Colombia as well. And I just thought that was one of the coolest things ever. Little 24, 25-year-old Alex sitting there going, all right, cool, now let's go buy some real estate in a foreign country. I was ecstatic to be able to be involved in that. So definitely something I'm very excited on talking with you today about, Sara. So if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of background about yourself and, you kind of your investing experience up to this point. And again, kind of the how, what, and the why of what's led you to what you're currently doing down in Central America.
Alex, very much for having me on this podcast. I'm really excited to share my journey, how I started in investing and how I got to Belize. So I've been a longtime investor. I actually have spent 25 years in mortgage lending. I was one of the top originators in the country. So I spent a couple decades in the residential mortgage business, originating loans. And I got into real estate investing probably starting about 2010, 11. Started in residential rental properties, went to started doing some flips, got into multifamily syndication, and started buying and flipping apartment buildings. And what we started to realize with my partners and I was that the opportunity with multifamily started to see some diminished opportunity with some returns. It was harder to find deals, and even though we had made some home runs on various multifamily deals, it was just becoming clear that the market was changing, and there were some areas that were just very saturated, and we were just not getting the returns that were making sense for us or our investors. So we started to look elsewhere, and as we're looking as investors, we're looking at, okay, what other markets can we pursue? Where are the opportunities? Where is the path of progress? And as an investor, we're always looking at path of progress because that's where some of the biggest opportunities are. And we traditionally did multifamily and, for value add type deals, we did new construction, new builds, and then of course our flipping business for residential. And we came across the opportunity. A friend of mine actually went to Belize several years ago, got married there, and just raved about it. Said, you need to go to Belize. There's so much opportunity there. And I kind of brushed it off a little bit. I said, okay, that sounds interesting. But didn't really, take it too seriously at the time. And then a few years ago, another partner of mine came and said, hey, we need to go check out Belize because I heard there's some opportunity down there and it's a beautiful country, and they were an avid fisherman. So my partner and I, we decided to make a trip down there. And for my first time, it was amazing. I fell in love with the country of Belize. And we went specifically to the island of Ambergris Caye. The island of Ambergris Caye is the largest island in Belize. It's a 28-mile long island, and it is known for having the second largest barrier reef in the world. So we went down there, and we just immediately saw the enormous opportunity from an investor standpoint, and also just from a tourist standpoint, how beautiful the island was, all the diverse ecosystems, the culture. The language is English. It's English speaking. It's actually one of the only countries in Central America that's English is the official language. We learned that the legal infrastructure is British common law, which was important because when you hold real estate, that's fee simple title. So you own real estate wholly with title, just like how we're used to holding property here in the U.S. And it had all other things like it's a tax haven. Like there's no capital gains. There's very low investment income tax. There's no estate tax. It has very low property tax. So we learned all these things about Belize in a fairly short amount of time, and we thought, hey, this is a no-brainer. Why didn't we come down here earlier? So I should have listened to my friend before that, and so then we actually took it pretty seriously. So we did a bunch of due diligence. We went around, saw a ton of properties, did a lot of research, and made some connections in Belize. And we ended up finding some properties. And we had, the course of the last couple of years, we've actually bought a number of properties, both in lots and in terms of parcels that we actually created a project and subdivided it into a 60-lot subdivision. So we have a number of projects going on in Belize, but as far as our journey of how we got there, we just really fell in love with not only the beautiful crystal blue waters, it's got the second largest barrier reef in the world. So all of the activities and excursions that the island offers from a visitor tourist standpoint. But then we also learned about, the opportunity to retire there under their QRP program. So with all of the incentives, the financial incentives, the tax incentives that the country offered, we took a very close look at Ambergris Caye specifically, and we looked at the next path of progress. So where we started buying property and where we started developing is actually in North Ambergris Caye. But what we actually started when we got there, we landed in San Pedro, which is the main town of Ambergris Caye. It's about 25,000 people. Now, what we discovered and what we found in our research is that San Pedro has developed probably the last decade, since 2014, 15. It really took off in terms of development. And then what happened was that right at 2018, 2019, COVID happened. And so once COVID happened, the island completely shut down for the 2 years. Actually, the country shut down, the island completely shut down. And so everything came to a halt. And so then when COVID reopened, which is right when we got there, things started to pick up back up, and it seemed like real estate was back on fire, and it's continued to just to grow significantly by leaps and bounds since then. The tourism rate has jumped from 30% just in a year from 2023 to 2024. There's a lot of new infrastructure going in, and there's brands that have already gone in, specifically Marriott, Hilton. We have Four Seasons that's developing an island down there. We have Margaritaville that just opened last year on the north side of the island. And then we also have some other brands that have also set precedents there as well. So we felt comfortable that we were not the first ones trailblazing the way, that we had these major brands that have already done the legwork. They have the top teams that do all of this data research, and they do all the due diligence ahead of us. And they've already established themselves in the last few years. So that was comforting for us, piggybacking off of the work that they've already done. So that's basically the journey. Alex said, as far as kind of where we were and how we got to Belize.
No, that's definitely very insightful. The kind of the first thing that a lot of people look at and are concerned about when investing, especially outside the United States, is understanding different judiciary codes and kind of how things work. It's very easy to kind of get a little bit narrow-minded with regard to investing within your own borders, and especially the ease of access we have to financial markets such as the Nikkei index and other trading platforms in different countries where you can just log onto your Fidelity account and okay buy part of a company that's traded maybe in India or in Japan or maybe somewhere in Europe. But when it comes to the more tangible investing, it's definitely something that is a little bit scary to people, and especially when I kind of got into it back a decade plus ago, it was definitely pretty interesting to learn about kind of the process in general, because everywhere has their own flavor, if you will. It's
Sure.
similar enough. You're still buying real estate, but you have to abide by a whole new set of rules and regulations. So let's kind of start from the beginning, where any start it needs to start from. So when it comes to going down there and trying to identify a property, what does the purchase process look like? Is it something where you engage a realtor? Is it something where you have to engage an attorney? Can you just go out and look for sale by owner signs? Kind of what was your kind of process besides just going down there and driving around of initially kind of finding those properties, and what did the initial like offer and contract process look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we started looking into Belize, that was one of the first things was, okay, we want to buy property. Who do we go to? And what does that process look like? Because for our first time, we had no idea. So our first property, we went to a local broker. First of all, in Belize, there's no MLS as we know it. There's no standardized MLS. You don't know exactly what's on the market. You can go online. You're going to see probably the same, and actually, you could see a listing online from one broker, and it would be listed on with a different broker for a different price. So it can be very confusing, and it's very hodgepodge. And the other thing is that in Belize, this is changing, by the way, but for the last several years, that you do not need necessarily a real estate license to sell property in Belize. So you would have lots of different people or people saying that they could sell you a property, and they weren't licensed. They didn't need to be licensed. And then you had true licensed brokers that were selling properties. So we did hire, in fact, a licensed broker in Belize, bought our first property, and went through the escrow process. We hired a local escrow closing agent in Belize. And the process for closing was very similar to here as through for title and escrow as we're used to. We put a deposit down. They wrote a purchase contract. We went through the due diligence process. For us, we were buying land, so there wasn't really much to inspect except going on site and walking the perimeter. We did a survey, so we wanted to make sure that our land was marked properly, and we knew where our boundaries were. So that's kind of the standard due diligence. And then, of course, closing, we had to wire in the rest of our funds, and then we received our title. Now, one thing that we learned was in Belize that you do not get title until you have to pay cash. There's no traditional financing in Belize to buy property. There are probably sources of financing, but traditionally you're going to get financing through either the seller. You can do seller financing, or you could have like a private money or private equity or some type of private fund. But most cases it's going to be either cash or if the seller's willing to finance. So our first couple of deals we did, we just got through the process. It seemed fairly simple. But again, being able to navigate through that was really about who you were using on the island. And we vetted out a few different agents. It was really word of mouth referral of who was through, because Belize is a very small country. It's a very small business community. Everybody seems to know everybody. And we would generally use the people that had good reputations on the island through word of mouth and referral only. Now, as we went along and we bought our large parcel for our subdivision. What we did is that was an off-market opportunity. And as an investor, some of the best opportunities are off-market. Not saying that you can't get a good deal that's on market, but this was an off-market opportunity with a local Belizean. and they were very motivated to sell to go to university. And so what we did is we made an offer, and we offered a lot lower than the broker thought that would be accepted. We ended up getting the lot. We bought a lot, or actually it's a parcel. We bought a 10-acre property. It was originally valued at about $1 million. They were going to list it for about $950. The seller decided they listed it with the broker off market for $750. And then we offered $375. They thought that we would never get it for that. But lo and behold, you just never know where a seller's coming from and how motivated they are. They accepted our offer for $375,000. So, so, so we got an amazing deal out of it, and again, went through the process and just closed like normal. Now that was a little bit that was a larger project because we were planning on doing this. We actually developed that. We subdivided it and created a subdivision of 60 units on that project. So what I will say, Alex, is that the process, it really is. You have to be very careful about who you're using, who you know. There is a lot of potential. There's opportunity that people will take to potentially sell you property where they have not done due diligence on title. There's some horror stories out there where people bought property, they didn't properly do the due diligence on the title, and so they found out that the title wasn't actually owned. They didn't have a clean title, or there was liens, or there was a seller carry somewhere in the history of it that wasn't paid off, or there was taxes that were still due that were not paid. So things like that again, you want to make sure that you're going through the right channel. And if you're going to just go for sale by owner, I would, again, just make sure that you're using the right professionals down there, to go through that process.
No, absolutely. And one thing that I kind of ran up against, I don't know if this holds true in Belize, but for instance, when I was doing a lot of investing for clients in Honduras and Roatan, or whether it was in Nicaragua or Panama, sometimes Central American countries will require some type of entity to hold title, where you have to, you can still buy property, but basically you form an entity within that country that you're the sole shareholder of, but then basically you own stock in the company there that owns title to the property. Is that the same case in Belize, or can you actually hold direct fee simple title where you look up a deed and Alex Perny owns XYZ house, or Sarah, or your entity does? Could you go through a little bit of is there any kind of interesting requirements to holding title down there? Is it very analogous to the United States?
Yeah, I would say that it's very similar to here in the U.S. You can actually do it both ways. So you can hold title just as an individual, just Sara Jung or Alex Perny, we just hold title as the individual, just like what we do here. But you can also hold title. There's other ways too. Like, as you mentioned, you can have an entity or a business or corporation. You can also hold title that way, and the business would hold title with the property as the asset. So then if you were to sell off the property, what you're doing is that you would basically sell off shares or sell off the company with the property as the asset that holds title, as the property as the asset. You can hold title as, again, company LLC. I've seen investors hold title through their trust. So again, lots of different options and different ways to hold title in Belize, just very similar to here in the US.
Great. And do they have a requirement that it has to be if you did, did you buy this through an entity, or did you buy it personally?
We actually, so I bought different properties there. So I have gone through actually a few different ways. I bought a lot actually just in my individual name, just cash. I have bought a couple different properties through my self-directed IRA. Actually, I use Advanta IRA for. I have bought. We have an entity that we hold property, that we hold our property through our entity. And so we've actually, now that we're speaking about it, I can say that we've held title in all those different ways.
Gotcha. And do they have any requirement for the entities to be domiciled in Belize, or can they be foreign entities?
No, and actually, it can actually be both. My understanding, so you can hold title through a Belizean entity. You can create a Belizean an entity down in Belize. Most of the investors that I work with, and also just for myself, we create U.S. entities, and that's how we hold title. So there's no specific rule that says, no, you cannot hold title as a U.S. entity. You can only hold title as Belizean. That's not the case. Now, what they did pass, I think it was about a year ago, they do require that all U.S. entities now get registered through the Belize government as an approved entity to do business in Belize, and that was passed about a year ago. But it's a very simple process. You provide your entity documents, just like here, you provide your entity documents to the closing agent. They get it registered, and you're off and running.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, it was definitely something interesting. Again, my first crack at this was in Honduras, and then again, kind of moving around a little bit to different places and how they operated, and it was pretty simple for the most part. I mean, with the exception of the entity part, for a lot of Central American countries, I mean, everything else, there was a real estate attorney, there was, a survey, there was a deed, it was all pretty straightforward. Again, really not just wrapping your head around the entity thing, which was not a whole lot different than what a lot of people do here anyway. You're the shareholder of a company with a few partners, and the asset is the underlying asset's the property, and then everyone holds shares of the company directly. So again, not not a lot of stuff down there is inherently too egregiously different than what we're used to in the United States. Now, again, kind of covered again the general process all sounds pretty similar and very similar to the United States of there's a lot of people that'll try to sell you property in the United States. We might have maybe a little bit more of a robust network of things like the MLS and the National Association of Realtors, and being licensed by that regard, but I think that more or less just kind of comes from the fact that we are a significantly larger country than population and land wise than a country like Belize. There's a need for that, right?
Right.
So now, when it comes to closing, again, you have, you get the deed and everything. Are there companies that will issue title insurance in Belize, or do you really have to have the due diligence done on the front end for the title work?
Yeah, so you really have to have the due diligence done up front through the title work. They will do a title search. You want to make sure that you have a clean title, that you're using a reputable closing agent. Um, and if you're financing, if you're financing, you cannot obtain your title until your property is free and clear. So you're not going to actually get that title until you've made your last payment on your loan to the seller. Um, and there is paperwork that's done upfront through the closing agent to prepare for that. You'll have an amortization schedule. You'll have a note, an agreement, a loan agreement, and then there's paperwork to do the title transfer once the last payment's been made. And of course, if you paid off early, you can expedite that paperwork, processed earlier. So yes, so I would recommend, in my experience, that you would want to do your title search up front.
Okay, and so basically, if you are doing financing in the sense that we do in the United States down in Belize, is it more of kind of like a master lease agreement than that you would hold with the bank in that case because you don't get title until you pay off the loan? So is that kind of how it would work? Like that's maybe a little point of confusion I have on that part.
Okay, so to clarify your question, so you're asking what are you referring to on the master lease?
So like if you so like and again, if I'm understanding this wrong, please do feel free to correct me. But if you go to buy a property and you finance it, you said you don't get title until you pay off that loan, correct?
Correct.
So if you have closed on a property with financing, then if the quote bank is holding title, then would you like what kind of rights do you have to that property? Is it basically
Oh,
kind of like a master lease agreement that you have for
no,
utilizing the
yeah,
property?
you have, so Belize has what they call, there's a loan agreement. There's an agreement that you sign at closing. I've signed several of them because we've done some, and I've also done seller financing. So as a developer and a seller, we've handled a number of lot sales. So we are the lender. And what it is there's an agreement that's signed, with a promissory note, and the title is actually held. In our case, what we typically do is we hold the physical title at our closing agent. They actually keep it like a safe or a vault. And that is the original title. You do have the original title in hand. Um, and so what happens is that, because we're not dealing necessarily with a bank, we're dealing typically with private parties or private entities. And so in the meantime, while you're making payments, that title is going to be held physically either at a corporate office or your closing agent's office or an attorney's office or somewhere safe that until the time's passed that the loan's been paid off. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but in our case, in most cases, in my experience, it's usually some type of a private party as a seller or a private or a company that's offering the financing. Now, with the bank, I cannot speak for if the bank is doing it. I'm not sure what their process is. We have not used a bank in our experience, so that might be a little bit different. But that's my understanding of whoever's holding the title is generally held in a vault or at a corporate office.
Okay, so two things with that. So basically, title is, quote, transferred, the property's conveyed, but you don't have kind of the bearer instrument, if you will, until that loan
Correct.
is paid off. Like in the United States, when you close on a property, you get the deed in your hand, right? You get the
Right.
original deed in your
So,
hand
so as
before
far
you.
as far as use of property, though, however, as
Yeah.
far as use of property, it's the same as here. So you still have use of property just like you would anywhere else. So you're not restricted to how you can use the property. So if you buy a property to Airbnb or to have it as a vacation home, there's no restriction in terms of how you can use the property.
Okay.
Uh, so to answer your question, there's no master lease, there's no separate agreement that would limit you in terms of your use.
Okay.
It's tied to your ability to have your title.
Okay, gotcha. So again, it goes into a little bit of kind of like bearer instrument clause then. So basically, would you have to have a loan paid off prior to closing, or can you close something and sell it and satisfy stuff through closing, or do you have to have that paid off prior to actually going in and marketing and selling a property?
I have not experienced that specifically, but I believe I've heard situations where that you could sell it. But again, I think it all has to come together through the closing table to make sure that everything's been paid off free and clear.
Okay, gotcha. And that's definitely a little bit of an interesting difference that, is always kind of important to flesh out when people are starting to do their due diligence on exploring investing in a foreign country is you know, as in with any real estate, the devil's going to be in the details. Like, hey, this looks great, but, you don't find the crack in the foundation until you do an inspection. You don't find out, two unclosed probates till you do a title search. It's again, the small things certainly add up, and again, hopefully you don't have unclosed
Sure.
probates because those are a nightmare. But kind of, I think that's a good primer on the beginning of this. Now, moving forward, especially I'm, sitting here in sunny Florida, which just had two major hurricanes come through. So things like insurance are always a big concern. So when it comes to insuring properties down there, and granted, if you're just buying raw land, your needs for insurance are going to be different than if you had, four rental houses that are being Airbnb'd on Ambergris Key. So what does it look like for insuring properties post close down there? Is it where you get underwritten from like U.S. companies? Is it specific companies to there? Or is it like international markets like Lloyd's of London who have to insure these properties for liability and damage? And what kind of coverages can you get down there as well?
Yeah, so I'll speak to that to the best that I can. So the properties that because we're developers for the most part, so we're buying land and we're actually building structures and we're building houses on. But my understanding, and I've spoken with a couple of different insurance providers down in Belize, but it's very similar to here. Now, one thing is because of the hurricanes and the tropical storms, their policies are a little bit different. They do have coverage. You can do a claim for hurricane and for storm damage. But they're going to have specific requirements as far as your build. So, for example, right now we're on our subdivision. We're in the process of we're finalizing our floor plan so that we can start building homes. And it's very important. Some of the requirements are having your house elevated at least 3 feet up from the ground. Now, our houses will be elevated 5 feet up, so it's not an issue for us. But concrete builds, concrete roofs, hurricane-proof windows, all of those particular all of the particular things that go into the build that mitigate risk for hurricanes and the storms that come through, those are all important. The insurance companies that I've dealt with are local to Belize. They're underwritten at a local level, and they're handled at a local level through one of the larger insurance carriers that I've dealt with and have been engaging with down there.
Okay, gotcha. And as far as liability coverage, what does it kind of look like as far as the tort issues that you might have in a country like Belize? Is it as garrulous as you might see in the United States? Can you carry liability coverage? Can you really speak to some of the issues that might come up for, again, real estate is something that can definitely generate some liability concerns. But what kind of exposures do you have down there when it comes to your liability coverages and liability concerns with owning real estate in Belize?
Yeah, so Alex, I'm probably not. I am not definitely the expert. I can't speak too much on that particular question. I do know that you can access liability insurance through these carriers. I don't really have a lot of detail as far as what type of coverage and the requirements are for that. But I would actually be happy to share their information because they have been very helpful in the past when I have brought questions to them. But my understanding is that if you do have the options to get liability. Again, as far as the specifics on that, I would have to defer to them, but I'd be happy to provide the information for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, that's I don't know what I don't know, so I always like asking these questions to kind of try to help people, kind of demystify investing, especially outside of our own borders. I think that's,
We actually are, and I'm glad that you bring that up because the insurance is actually something that's a little bit of a mystery to a lot of people, and it's something that also that I've been learning about myself. So we're actually going to, we were talking about actually doing another, maybe some education for people that are interested in Belize and trying to do maybe more some education on the insurance aspect of it. So you do bring something up that's important that I think it'd be important to get some further education on.
no, absolutely. Now, kind of further that you mentioned that you're very involved more kind of in the development play down there. So, when it comes to developing and building, people are, again, very familiar in the United States with, okay, well, I want to do something. Well, now I got to ask the government for permission, right, with my own property. It's a point of contention with a lot of people, but it's the nature of of kind of what you go through. So you alluded to it a little bit with kind of the insurance question that I ask of saying, hey, there's certain requirements of having elevations of 3 feet, having proper wind mitigation, whether it be the construction materials, windows, doors, all that kind of stuff, roofs especially. Um, so when it comes to actually developing something and permitting down there, what does that look like? Is it basically kind of the same process as putting in your site plans, putting in with general contractors? Do you have to use contractors that are approved by the state or that are from Belize, or can you use foreign labor for stuff? Maybe go into a little bit of that because I think that's kind of where
Yeah.
you're focusing right now is on the development plan.
Absolutely. So there's a few different areas that we work in. So one is where we do land development. So as developers, we're buying the land and we're going through the process to create the infrastructure, doing the construction of the land to put the roads in, put the power in. We go through the approval process um, to get our power map approved, and then of course we go through the subdivision process to get all of our lots entitled as fee simple titles. Then there's the home building, the vertical construction piece of it, which we're starting now. We're actually in that process of going through the initial stages of that so that we can actually start building homes. Um, again, the process is very similar to the U.S. It's in Belize. I would say it's a little bit more simplified. Here when we've done development, we've done development here in California. You have to go through the permitting process. You go get your plans and specs. You hire your architect, your engineer, your general contractor. You come up with your cost, your plans, your costs, and all of that, right? And then you go get your financing, and then you start to build. When we start the process for the development for the horizontal land construction, you do have to go through that similar entitlement process, just like you do here. Developer here in the U.S., they buy the land, they go through the entitlement process, they put the infrastructure in. So all of that approval process, getting those permits, getting the sign off for the subdivision for the titles, that's a very similar process there as well. When you go to build a home, you apply for the permit. Now that part I will tell you is going to be is more simplified. You can use a local builder in Belize. You can also use a builder that's from the U.S. that is in Belize. They're U.S. Contractors, or they're from the U.S. And they live down in Belize and they build homes, and that's what they do. We find that so Belize is an interesting place. We have a local community of Belizeans. We also have a very large, diverse population of expats that live there full time, or even part time, or have moved down there from both the U.S. and from Canada. So we've met quite a few contractors that have moved down there, moved their businesses down there. They are now building homes. And then, of course, we've met some wonderful local Belizean contractors that build as well. So, to get the permit to build a house, it's not as a red tape process as here necessarily. It's a little bit more simplified. It's not a small country. It's a very small island. So you're really only dealing with maybe a few people. So you're not going to necessarily go through the red tape or the bureaucracy that you might experience here getting a permit.
No, that definitely is, kind of an aspect that, a lot of people, maybe fail to realize is a benefit to investing in a smaller country is that there's just, less people. There's, typically going to be less government just by the virtue of the fact that it's smaller, less population. So maybe getting things through, could certainly be a little bit of a benefit because depending on where you live, I mean, living in California, if you ever try to do anything out there, I'm sure, for my clients that develop out there, it can be garrulous, depending on what state that you live in. So that's pretty interesting. Now, from the perspective here, you primarily, and there's a second part to this question, but real quick, primarily you focus mainly on Ambergris Key, correct? Or have you done any mainland investing as well?
No, not at this time. And the reason we're focusing on Ambergris Caye is because that is the top tourist retirement destination as being the largest island in Belize. The data shows that the jump from the tourism rate in Ambergris Caye has been outpacing the other islands like Corzal or the other kind of like tourist attractions like Placencia and some of the smaller islands. And so where we believe that the largest opportunity is for the path of progress is in North Ambergris Caye, specifically north of San Pedro, because that's where the kind of the drivers, Ambergris Caye having the barrier reef, having the resources that the island has, having the tourist attraction, that we feel that that's where we would like that we're focusing our time. Now, that's not to say that other opportunities are not available on the mainland or in some of these areas. For our particular group, that's where we're focusing on because that's where we feel is the biggest opportunity, at least between now and the next 5 years.
Sure. So, and the second part to that question is, kind of going back a little bit to the development and everything else, especially where I live in Florida, very coastal, and some of our building regulations are significantly more stringent with not the economic, but the environmental aspect of it, especially building on an island, big barrier reefs, there's probably a big push to have protections for that. So, as far as the kind of environmental aspect of building down there, would you say it is any more challenging, especially maybe, specifically to where you're investing, because that's probably where a lot of people would look, especially with the path of progress kind of being there. Any particular environmental concerns that you found either a little bit tough to navigate or just maybe a little bit more expensive than you might imagine? Because I know, especially in places that are getting developed, things like a robust sewer system might not be there, so you might have to do septic. Doing septic on something like an island, especially with a lot of protected waters, can be very expensive. So, were there any particular things that maybe had jumped out when it came to doing development with regard to the environmental aspect of doing it that was either more expensive or maybe less expensive and a little bit more surprising when you went through it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it depends on the scope of your project, where it's located. I think there's a number of factors that go into that. Depending on where the project's located, how big the project is, if you're going to be doing overwater bungalows versus if you're more inland, how many units you're building, if they're, again, so I think so in our experience, we did like on our 60 lot subdivision, ours was inland in about 900 feet inland. And we're up north, and so we put in the roads and we had to put in some of the infrastructure up there. And so there are options that you can either do depending on the scope of the project. You can either you'll do an environmental impact study or you can get an environmental waiver. And in our case, that we were able to, based on the scope of the project, we got an environmental waiver. Now, on another project that we're working on that we're launching, it's a 70-acre subdivision that's just north of our 60 lots. And it's right off of it's actually all ocean lagoon front. We have about a half a mile of waterfront, and we're going to actually be building out some canals and there's a couple of existing lakes on the property. Now on that, again, we're actually going through the process of determining the requirements for the environmental clearance. And based on our experience on the island, again, I think it just depends where it's at, the scope of the project. And it's really not any different than here in the U.S. Here especially here in California, it's tough. All of the red tape and bureaucracy that you have to go through to get environmental clearance and do your impact studies here. I would say that that's the same thing that, the process that we go through down in Belize. But again, down in Belize, because it's smaller, the island is not very big. You're dealing with a few different parties. It's not to say that you're not going to go through the process, but I would say that because you're just dealing with a smaller government, that you can get through that maybe a little bit more quicker.
Yeah, so it's probably a fair comparison to say that the environmental process is probably no different than any development project you might have in the United States that's probably one coastal and two has some type of vested like economic like tie to that coastal region, such as tourism, fishing, or estuary type things. So pick
Sure.
your coastal Florida, California's, Carolinas, things like that might be probably a good analog for people if you have to go through any of that kind of stuff, which again is good. Having lived in Florida my entire life and seeing what, maybe less scrupulous developers have done to coastal regions and things that, personally I would like to protect and, as a general economy, we should be protecting, is a at the end of the day is a good thing to have in protection. And granted, it can be problematic, but at the end of the day, it's a net positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And and there's always, as a developer, investor, builder, whatever side, there's always a balance of, you just have to work together to find the balance to honor the environment that you're in, to provide benefit to the local community, right? Because, the developments and these projects that come to the island are bringing, growth and economic growth for the community. And then there's also, honoring the natural habitat, right? And so we definitely get all of those factors, and I think it's always just there's a little bit of push and pull continuously to find that balance and create opportunity for the local community with the tourism, but then also preserve and create some space for the coastal area and the environmental and the for example, Ambergris Caye has the largest, most popular salt flats for fly fishing. So with the fly fishing, it's like, again, if you're having overwater bungalows, like what's the impact of that? So all of those things, I think it's always a continuous process to find that balance.
No, great. Then these are all good points. And the two things that I kind of like to lead into the conclusion of this are kind of ongoing costs. So, the second one we'll touch on it first, but just kind of round out the development. Cost of materials and labor. Especially cost of materials definitely goes up anytime you're on an island. But would you say that the cost of materials is markedly different from the United States? Again, assuming that you're building on, let's say, a barrier island or other something else where you have to you can't just haul in an 18 wheeler of plywood or concrete blocks. But would you say that it's any markedly different than what your typical analog in the United States might be for kind of a similar development with things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think coming from California, where everything is so extravagantly expensive, Belize is actually, it's actually, it seems it's more affordable to me. As far as again, I also think it depends what you're building and what materials you're using and what you're sourcing as far as your materials. If you're sourcing from locally, it's going to be cheaper than if you're, sourcing from, out of the country somewhere and you have to barge it in, like as you said. And so what we find is that, it can be a bit all over the spectrum. But for example, in our subdivision that we're building, our 60 lots in North, our cost to build is generally, you can get cost to build under 200 under 200 per square foot. But of course, that again just depends. We're doing concrete, we're doing concrete construction. If you're sourcing other higher end materials, that cost, of course, will go up. So again, I think it just depends what materials you're using, where you're sourcing it from, and what you're building, and also where on the island you are. So the other example I give is our costs to do our roads, for example, are cheaper because we're on the north side of the island where the quarry is located, so they don't have to drive their trucks 10 miles to the south to San Pedro. So that saves us on cost there. Um, so in essence, I would say that again, it's not completely extravagant. I think it's actually very reasonable. I think it's similar to what you can build here, but I think it depends where you live in the state. If you're in California, you could be at way upwards of 250 per square foot, 300, 400, 500, 1,000 per square foot, especially if you're in Southern California along the coast. Maybe not so much if you're in the Midwest or on the East Coast in different markets. So hopefully that kind of gives you some perspective. So I think it just depends.
No, absolutely. Those all great points. And then the last thing I'd like to touch on is, a big thing here with the United States is property taxes and kind of ongoing expenses that you might have that might be borne more from the government side. So, what do things like property taxes look like down in Belize? Do you have like an annual property tax assessment? Is it something where it's paid up front? Is it assessed biannual? Again, just kind of how does that look from the investor perspective when it comes to taxes on property in Belize?
Yeah, so there's a few different things. So property taxes is lower. I'm in California, so our property taxes are here are pretty high. Um, but generally speaking, property taxes on just a standard just property, I find to be it's less than 1% of the value. On land, it's even cheaper. Again, I was giving an example of a piece of vacant land. You're only paying like $100 to $200 a year annually. Now, Belize does have what they call stamp duty tax. So when you close on, let's say, a piece of property, you're going to pay about an 8% what they call stamp duty tax on the transfer of whatever that is. So if it's whatever your price is, 200,000, 300,000, you're going to pay 8% on that at closing. Um, and so those factors that they do build that in upfront, but then the annual property taxes are much lower.
Okay, gotcha. And then when it comes to like revenue generated from a property, and this is a very widely, has a lot of different ways you can look at it because especially being a foreign national investing into a foreign country, you have different things to look at whether or not you're repatriating your funds or if you're keeping things locally. Again, it's again just kind of specific to your use case. When it comes to actual revenue generation, what does kind of the transactional taxes look like in Belize for either renting, selling property down there from the investor standpoint. Let's just assume that you're not repatriating the funds.
So, I've met plenty of investors and people that have gone down to Belize and they bought rental properties and vacation homes and they've gone through that process. My understanding. So one thing that is with Belize is that they have a very low income investment tax rate of 1.75. And Now, as far as how it gets taxed here in the U.S., I couldn't really speak to that. I would say that's based on every investor's individual situation. But Belize does have one of the lowest rental income investment tax rates, as well as the capital gains at 0%. Um, I personally do not have an Airbnb. I've not gotten to that point yet, but I have met and I've known plenty of investors that have done their own Airbnbs and they have houses that they rent out short term and long term.
Okay, great. So yeah, it's again that's again a great high level answer to that, and again to the point of the focus of this podcast. I always encourage people when it comes to anything with taxes, you know yourself better than anyone else is going to besides your CPA or tax attorney. So again, especially when it comes to investing outside of the U.S. It's very important. One of the biggest things I could encourage anyone investing outside of the United States, besides making sure you have good representation, such as a good broker, a good person doing title in that particular country, if it's real estate related, is getting a CPA or tax attorney here in the United States that's familiar with people investing, especially where you are, because there's different types of trade agreements, our different agreements with regard to taxation between like the UK and the EU versus Central and South America and China and all these other places, will directly affect how your taxes look when you try to start bringing that money home, and depending on all that stuff. So that's a very key component in all this from, again, my personal experience in helping clients invest is that will save you, a lot of headache in the future is understanding, how to use the money you're making. So it's all well and good for this conversation saying, hey, look, real estate's a great play in the US and internationally. Doing all of this, the ultimate goal is to make some money, right? So understanding how you can actually, use that money and keep as much of it ideally as that you've made as possible, again, being very, very important. So, I think we've definitely gone through a great introduction to investing in Central America, especially with Belize, and how, again, how many corollaries can be drawn between what we do here in the United States as real estate investors and what you can do down there. It's really awesome when, we can have guests like you that are, to help to demystify some of this stuff, because again, to the very beginning point that I made here is that it's very hard to find value and new pockets of value in any part of the investing spectrum, whether that's traditional, whether that's alternative, whether that's real estate, here in the United States, and being able to find that somewhere that is not too terribly far away. I mean, I think getting to Belize from Florida is like a 2-hour plane flight. It's not, you're not going across a huge, massive ocean. You're not going down to, taking a 14-hour plane flight. It's quite literally kind of in our backyard. And
that's something that I was very surprised about, that it's only a 2-hour flight. I mean, we're in California, so, we fly out from San Francisco, but, from Houston is typically where we go through, but from Houston it's only a couple-hour plane ride. So we were very pleasantly surprised how accessible it is.
Absolutely. Well, again, I really appreciate your time being on with us today. Are there any kind of closing thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with when it comes to your story and your insights that you've given to us today?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alex, for having me here as a guest, and just happy to share about Belize and what we've been doing down there. And again, if anything I could leave with anybody is just keeping in mind path of progress. Just as an investor, that's why we invest. And the largest opportunity is in the path of progress. And that's why we're developing down in Belize. And what I always feel is that, as an investor, the humans are inherently prone to always moving forward to progress. And so the movement down there is inevitable. It's not something that's it's not something that, if it's going to happen, it's just when it's going to happen. So the key is timing. It really is. Because if it's not us, it's going to be somebody else. And that island will be developed, and the people are moving there. It's just a trajectory of growth that is just inevitable. And so something that we're very excited about. If anybody wants to learn more about us or see what we're up to in Belize, they can always visit our website at www.platinumbeachbelize.com, and you can check out some of the stuff we have going on. So appreciate your time, Alex, and appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely, Sarah. Thank you so much. As corny as it sounds, I always like to end off with this: is that the most valuable asset we all have is our time, because no matter how well we invest, we can't make more of it, right? So thank you for taking some of your valuable time out of your day to come and talk to us and our audience today. We really appreciate it. With that said, my name is Alex Perny. As always, this has been the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Thanks for joining with us, and have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Tune in next week for more investing tips and strategies.
Want to hear more episodes of the Alternative Investing Advantage? Search podcast at advantaira.com and subscribe.